Okay, do you want to see you call the quorum?
All right. Commissioner Draper. Commissioner Halleck.
Oh, he's muted.
That's fine. Okay. That's, Commissioner Hugo,
Here.
Commissioner Johnson, Commissioner Rogers,
Here.
Commissioner Westerberg,
Here.
and Chair Linwall.
Here.
Right, we do have a quorum.
Okay, the next thing we need is a motion to suspend the rules to allow the meeting to be conducted by Zoom.
I so move.
We have a second?
Second.
Okay, I guess would you call the roll?
Yes. Commissioner Halleck,
Yes.
Commissioner Hugo,
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers,
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg,
Yes.
and Chair Linwall.
Yes.
That
Okay.
passes as well.
Okay, next item is approval of the meeting minutes from March 24th and April 14th.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
I'm going to ask that those be broken into separate votes because I cannot vote on one of those because I was not a member of the commission yet.
that's fine. And I have corrections for one and not the other. So I think that makes sense. So can I have a motion for the minutes of March 24th? Someone who was there?
Sorry, I move to approve those minutes.
Do we have a second? Actually, I think I need to second, or George, or I'll second them.
I'll second. So I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any corrections or changes? Not, I think you can call the roll.
All right. Commissioner Halleck,
Yes.
Commissioner Hugo,
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers. Oh,
I have to abstain from that vote.
Commissioner Westerberg,
Yes.
and Chair Linwall.
Yes,
All right.
and now could I have a motion to approve the minutes from April 14th?
I move approval of the minutes from April 14th, 2021.
Okay, is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, I have a number of changes. First of all, we started the meeting at 6 p.m. So that needs to change up at the top, and then at the meeting was called to order at 6 p.m. in item number 1. The second thing is we're missing, I believe that's when I was elected chair and Commissioner Draper was elected vice chair, because it was Commissioner Isaac's last meeting. And while he chaired the meeting, there's, we ought to add that section back in. I believe that's when that happened. This also then on page 7 of the minutes for the comments from Alyssa Jameson. In the first line, she added that the neighborhood is invested in development of the lot, and then it should read daycare is good, not God, at the size. And then also on page 9 in the second full paragraph, the, kind of next to the last line, there's the applicant should not be ashamed for running a for-profit business, and then it should be and the for-profit aspect rather than he. And I think that's, and then at the top of page 12, we're discussing that the height does not bother her and the requested allowances are fairly minimal, so not should be removed. And I think that that concludes my suggested corrections. So I don't remember, do we need to have a motion to approve the corrections or just make the approved minutes as corrected?
You need to make a motion.
To approve accept the corrections?
Correct.
Okay, would someone like to make that motion?
I move that we accept the corrections as
I was
noted.
going to say, I'll move to approve the minutes as corrected.
Okay. And we have a second?
That's right.
I'll second, Jean.
All right, thank you. And I think we can vote.
Right, Commissioner Halleck,
Commissioner Howe, you're muted.
Sorry, my computer is going out.
It happens.
Commissioner Hugo,
Yes.
All set.
Commissioner Rogers,
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg,
Yes,
and Chair Linwell.
Yes.
That passes as well.
I'm going to move locations. This is now working.
Okay, we'll see you in a bit.
Okay.
Okay. Next up on the agenda is the discussion. It's the proposed text amendment related to the occupancy of dwelling units. It's a city-initiated text amendment to the zoning ordinance, Title VI of the code, to discuss the occupancy of dwelling units and the definition of family. Ms. Jones, do we have is staff going to make a presentation or walk us through the material?
Yes, I've got a presentation I'll go through.
All right.
All right, can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so I think the zoning committee is probably pretty familiar with what the information that I'm going to go over for the most part. But since there are members of the commission who have looked at this in some time, I'll go through everything. So the text amendment that we're reviewing is actually made from an aldermanic referral to the Plan Commission that happened in September of last year. And that was to discuss and consider modifications to the zoning ordinance and to change the occupancy of dwelling units and the definition of family. So staff's initial recommendations that came along with that, which also provide the basis for the alternatives that are described within the staff report for tonight's meeting, included exploring the use of occupancy standards from the building or property maintenance code for both owner occupied and rental dwellings, consideration of an option to limit the maximum occupancy of all dwelling units, regardless of size, to 8 occupants, whether related or unrelated. And then in that case, any dwelling proposed for more than 8 occupants would then apply for a special use as a rooming house. And this would mean that we would need to make rooming houses a permitted use or special use in all zoning districts, or residential zoning districts rather. And then also consideration of eliminating any reference to family in the zoning regulations for the occupancy of dwelling units and the entire zoning ordinance. So this was initially brought to the Plan Commission for discussion in November of last year. That discussion began, the commission decided to send this on to the zoning committee for further review. It was in the zoning committee for several meetings in February and then a couple of meetings in April. So some of the main discussion points included actually discussing the purpose and benefits of retaining the family definition or removing it within the occupancy standards. And that basically centered on whether or not that would improve or have some kind of impact on the enforcement of occupancy standards and the broader goal of providing safe, affordable housing for all of our residents. And also the impacts on residents with different cultural backgrounds, Northwestern students that may be living off campus, and members of other protected classes, including those that may live in shared housing. We also discussed the benefits and challenges of applying occupancy rules across both owner-occupied and rental units. And this is where we started to discuss using the square footage and configuration of dwelling units to determine the maximum occupancy for dwelling units. And this is actually discussed in a little bit more detail within the alternative that are laid out in the staff report, where we have landlords submit floor plans when they are applying for rental registration, or having floor plans be submitted at the time where transfer stamps are being done for the sale of a house. And then we would have someone determine the maximum occupancy at that time. We also discussed how to enforce possible new or existing regulations as they related to addressing nuisances. And this was a good part of the discussion. In some cases, this meant creating operating agreements and adjudication once violations are given, and a determination of liability found in hearing to rental units, and realizing that owner-occupied enforcement is usually done on a complaint basis. Actually making sure, trying to find some way to enforce our existing nuisance ordinances and property maintenance codes, and realizing the need for additional staff in order to properly go about enforcing the regulations and conduct inspections. And we also, as staff, brought up the point that with Title VI, which is the zoning code, is not really the place to address occupancy standards or to regulate or control human behavior. Generally, zoning is related to land use and the built environment. And we do have nuisance ordinances that are within other titles that are meant to address nuisances and standard property standards for the housing that's within Evanston. And at one of the meetings, we also had a quick consideration of using the recently approved administrative review use process, which right now is in place for commercial properties, to create a permitting process for residences with increased occupancy. So I won't go into too much detail on this one, but this is the existing definition of family. So we've got 4 different sections essentially, and it's fairly lengthy. The last item, item B, was actually pretty specific to the REBA fellowship. Staff did have some conversations with them, and there was a staff member who actually was around at the time when this was put in place, and they were amenable to changes to the code if it were to be based off of a dwelling unit configuration and square footage. This section actually deals with the actual occupancy. This actually is within Title VI. Over the several discussions that have occurred, I think there was a general agreement to revise some of the archaic language that's within this section, as well as probably get rid of that should actually be item B with regards to the size of the dwelling units where you can have a roomer or a guest. And referring back to the property standards regulations, this is a chart that pretty much just displays what those are. Again, it's not simply based on the square footage of a dwelling unit. It also considers the configuration of that dwelling unit. And there's a certain amount of square footage that is required for the number of occupants and the amount of common space and bedrooms that are within a particular unit. So it's not a straightforward square footage calculation, but there's a number of other things that are considered with that. As I mentioned previously, we do have existing nuisance regulations. They are generally within Title V, which speaks to general property maintenance requirements, rental registration, responsibilities of landlords and tenants, and that is where the details of our fair housing and inclusionary housing ordinances are. Title VIII, which is in our health and sanitation code, and specifically Chapter 3, nuisances. This lays out various types of nuisances as well as the abatement and prevention of those nuisances and some prohibited actions. Title IX, which deals with public safety, and Chapter 5, specifically Section 4, nuisance premises. This defines nuisance premises and provides a procedure for addressing those premises. And within our Fair Housing and Human Rights Ordinance, in Chapter 5, we have also the Human Rights Ordinance in Chapter 21. The definition is pretty different from the zoning code and is focused on preventing discrimination against families with children. With regards to familial status, this refers to whether a household includes one or more individuals who have not attained the age of 18, who are domiciled with a parent or another person that has legal custody of that person, or a designee of parent or other person having that custody with written permission of the parent or another person. The protection afforded against discrimination on the basis of familial status applies to any person who is pregnant or is in the process of securing legal custody of any individual who has not attained adult status, essentially. So we have had some fair housing issues within Evanston. We've got some that have occurred since 2003. We've had discrimination cases filed with HUD and IDHR. Race was the most common issue seen here at 29%, disability at 27%, and national origin at 19%. Property owners have advertised rentals for students only. And then we've got some anecdotal reports of different treatment of female-headed households that happen to have teenage boys and were seeking rental residence. So as I mentioned briefly and is more detailed in the staff report, we have a couple of alternatives that were proposed, and those are based off of our initial recommendations earlier on. The first alternative was to remove the definition of family from the zoning code as it currently stands and basically just reference the dwelling unit, and over occupancy enforcement would then be based on the square footage requirements that I mentioned previously. This would apply for both owner and rental properties. The enforcement would require the hiring of an additional inspector to support those added inspections that would be needed and enforcement, including calculations of the occupancy based on the floor plans that would be submitted. And the inspector would also support some of the routine rental inspections and the number of rental units, or as the number of rental units continues to increase with the developments that we see. The second alternative was to change the number and the definition of a single family from 3 to 8. So then that would make, we would make rooming houses available in all residential districts, and enforcement of this would also require the hiring of an additional inspector. So when we reference the comprehensive plan, the 2000 plan actually speaks pretty widely to housing in neighborhoods, specifically in Chapter 2 are neighborhoods. Some of the key objectives include maintaining the appealing character of neighborhoods while guiding their change. This is one I think is probably common that we see in our meetings. And also promoting activities that help strengthen communities and improve neighborhood quality of life, and also recognizing the effect of housing on the quality of neighborhoods. And specifically in Chapter 3, which deals with housing, some of the objectives there include maintain and enhance property values and positive perceptions of housing in Evanston, addressing concerns of cost and affordability, preserving Evanston's historic residential architecture and ambiance, addressing poor housing conditions which detract from neighborhood quality of life. So I do want to note that at this point, 21 years since the plan was approved, there have been a lot of changes that have occurred with regards to how people view families. So this is something that we do want to take into consideration as we're looking at any changes that we make to the zoning code. And also within the plan, it also does speak to being collaborative with regards to existing institutions and organizations that are within Evanston to ensure that we provide affordable and fair housing for all of the residents. So I think this actually covers the base information that I was going to provide. So with that, I'll stop sharing and open it to questions or comments from the commission.
Actually, I'd like to kind of start.
Yep.
I think that I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about the context and some of the discussions that we've had. I think it's very important to remember that the purview of the Plan Commission is the comprehensive plan and the zoning ordinance. Enforcement happens in other parts of the city code, as Ms. Jones has kind of provided an overview. But there are a couple of specific links to the zoning ordinance family definition and other ordinances, and actually in the zoning ordinance itself, beyond just the name of the various districts. First of all, in the zoning ordinance, the affordable or the accessory dwelling unit amendments that the city adopted fairly recently, that specifically defines the occupants refers back to the definition of family for that occupants, for who can be in an accessory dwelling unit. The other point is that in the Fair Housing Ordinance, as Ms. Jones described, its basic parameters are to address discrimination and discriminatory behavior. But one of this, in the definition section of that ordinance, it defines a dwelling unit as a room or group of rooms designed for occupancy of one family as defined in the Evanston zoning ordinance. So there's a specific link that would be impacted if we do away with the definition of family altogether. At the last zoning committee meeting, there were several speakers who really pointed to the need for an overall strategy before any changes to the zoning ordinances made. And clearly there's a broader discussion that the city council needs to have in terms of the potential impacts of the proposals to either eliminate or modify the family definition. As Ms. Jones noted, both of the alternatives presented in the staff memo anticipate the need for additional personnel to implement the recommendation. And frankly, I think there are probably other parts of the code that deal with enforcement that would be impacted. And I think that needs to, those considerations ought to be taken into consideration during our discussion. And as Ms. Jones outlined, the staff memo provided two alternatives, but I would like to propose a third approach that addresses the broad range of the differences in the types of families that have been, how families have evolved. And that I would suggest, it really kind of gets to the notion of functional families or chosen families, I think are the terms that I've seen. And so what I would suggest is that, in terms of the potential impacts of the proposals to either eliminate or modify the family definition, I think the city council needs to have a broader discussion in terms of the potential impacts of the proposals to either eliminate or modify the family definition. And so what I would suggest is that, in terms of the potential impacts of the proposals to either eliminate or modify the family definition, I think the city council needs to have a broader discussion in terms of the potential impacts of the proposals to either eliminate or modify the family definition. And so what I would suggest is that, in terms of the potential impacts of the proposals to either eliminate or modify the family definition, I think the city council needs to have a broader discussion in terms of the potential impacts of the proposals to either eliminate or modify the family definition. And so what I would suggest is that, in terms of the potential impacts of the proposals to either eliminate or modify the family definition, I think the city council needs to have a broader discussion in terms of the potential impacts of the proposals to eit kind of an alternative 3 would be to modify the type A family definition to be one or more persons related by blood, marriage, adoption, or similar formal or informal household relationships, reflecting a shared responsibility for the common welfare of all household members living together as a single housekeeping unit in a dwelling unit. So I've seen various definitions that get much wordier than that, but the notion is that we want to accommodate a wide variety of different kinds of family types. So with that, my suggestion would be that might be most efficient to deal with the alternatives 1 and 2 for our discussion, kind of deal with them one at a time and ask questions of staff. So unless commissioners have another idea, that's what I would suggest. And so I guess perhaps we could kind of talk through alternative 1, which was eliminating the zoning definition completely.
I have a question on alternative 1. I like alternative 1 and I understand about what Commissioner Linwall suggested for alternative 3. I understand why that might be a good idea, but I also think that family is you're forcing the definition of family onto groups of people that aren't families in the first place. So it's kind of a family is a term that we use, and we use it to designate a certain group, and to broaden it way beyond what it really is meant to be might not be the way to go. So I like alternative 1. I have a question on square footage though. How is there a method that that's been determined how square footage will be measured? Or are we?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think I've got Angelique Schnur on the line who deals with the occupancy and that calculation on a more regular basis. I think she can probably speak to that.
Sure, thank you. When we get a complaint of over occupancy and we send an inspector out to take a look at a property, we measure the room wall to wall, 2 sides, and then we do the calculation for how large the room is. The first thing we do is calculate the bedroom sizes to determine how many people can occupy the property based on the bedroom sizes. And then we calculate the square footage of the configuration of the remaining of the house in terms of living room, dining room, combined habitable space. And so oftentimes you might be able to have 8 people residing in a dwelling unit based on the sleeping rooms, but because of the configuration of the common areas, you can only have 5. And so based on the configuration of the common areas after the square footage of the sleeping rooms, that is what calculates the maximum occupant load of the property. So you have to be able to meet the square footage of the bedroom sizes, but also the common area.
Is that definition how available to us?
It's in the property maintenance code. It explains it a little bit more in terms of the verbiage versus just the graphic of the chart that I think was provided to you. But that's, we always look at the bedroom first and then we do the configuration of the common space.
Yeah.
And basically it's 50 square feet per person in a bedroom. 70 square foot for one person and 50 square foot for more than one person.
Yes, in the bedroom, yes.
So.
Okay.
And okay, anyone else?
Is there, Commissioner, before you go,
Sure.
is there any sort of do we have any sort of a relationship between common areas to bedrooms in properties? Or is it just, for example, if things worked out square footage wise, could my apartment be 80% bedroom and 20% common living space?
I suppose it could be because the code doesn't speak to that. It speaks to the specifications of the room itself. So in terms of the square footage of the sleeping room, and then it talks about having a specific living room size and a specific dining room size, or the combined living room, dining room space itself.
But there isn't a relationship between the two bedrooms versus the common areas.
No, there's nothing that says you have to have this amount of sleeping room to have this amount of common area.
And in the inspections that you're familiar with, and I'm not going to hold you to a number. I want you just to make your best guess. What is typically the relationship of the bedrooms to the overall square footage of the apartment? Do things typically tend to fall into a 50-50 category, a 70-30?
In terms of square footage from bedroom to square footage of combined habitable space, I think it's pretty similar. I mean, you might have a property, a dwelling unit where there's 4 bedrooms, but you can't necessarily have 4 people because maybe the combined square footage isn't enough, but they're usually pretty similar. If we have a property that has 6 or 7 bedrooms, there's typically a kitchen with an eat-in kitchen area. There might be a dining room and a living room. And oftentimes there's family room that you consider too as combined habitable space. So, you know, when you look at the overall, if you have a large property with 6 bedrooms, you're typically going to have more combined spaces that you can utilize as habitable space together.
So we aren't seeing situations in which people are converting 90% of the house into bedrooms and then keeping just the bare minimum for a living room, dining room situation.
When we get a complaint of over occupancy, that's typically not the case. We typically go in and it's a very large house with 5 or 6 sleeping rooms and then lots of combined space. Have we seen a couple where there's not, where they've made a dining room into a sleeping room? Sure, we have, but that's not the norm.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other comments? Questions?
Is there an between alternative 1 and 2? I know we're talking about only 1 now, but is there a difference in terms of the burden of enforcement from? Would both
Yes.
be equally or not? What would be the difference in terms of enforcement difficulty?
In terms for option 2, it would be permitting rooming houses in all zoning districts. In order for a rooming house to exist, number 1, it's licensed, and rooming houses are inspected annually versus rental units, which are inspected every 3 to 5 years or on a complaint basis. So if we allow rooming houses, they're inspected more frequently, and it's an annual license for them. But also, unless the owner resides on site at a rooming houses are required to be sprinklered. So there's a little bit more of a, you know, fire safety mechanism there versus just a smoke detector and a carbon monoxide detector.
And am I correct in understanding that an inspector would need to be hired regardless of what option we went with, either 1 or 2? The city would need to add additional staff. Is that correct?
Well, if we're doing option 2, absolutely, because you're talking about the potential for more rooming houses, and since they're inspected annually, yes, we would. Option 1 would be, at a minimum, we would have to have somebody at the beginning while we start doing all of these calculations and accepting all of these floor plans. But I think the potential for, you know, for keeping somebody on board to facilitate those rental inspections as we continue to increase our inventory, I think it becomes important because we are really kind of maxed oftentimes. So.
Other questions? Okay, hearing none, I have several. The first really kind of goes, you know, if we don't have a definition of family at all, you know, kind of why would this proposal to calculate maximum occupancy for all 30,000 dwelling units in Evanston, is that even necessary? What's the purpose behind that? Especially since you have to measure the rooms in any event when you're doing inspections?
Well, the purpose of the occupant load is to base it for life safety purposes. So is the building large enough to handle that number of occupant load people? The same way as if you get a permit and you build a church, you are licensed for a number of people that are allowed to be in that building. When you have a banquet hall, there's a sign on the door that says maximum occupant load 320. And that's based on the square footage. It's based on the number of exits. It's based on how far you have to go to get from the banquet hall to the outdoors. And so I think part of that comes into play when you talk about measuring the room sizes and calculating occupant load based on square footage versus the definition of family. It's still important because we don't want people packing in just because we've removed the definition of family. You still have to look at the safety of the structure, which is what we're tasked to do, to make sure that these properties are safe.
Okay. You noted, or it was noted in the staff memo, that there have been about 70 new rental units that have come online in existing buildings. And I know that you know, I looked at you had mentioned, or somebody had mentioned that floor plans are required.
Yes.
So have you got the floor plans for those 70 units?
Yes, we have.
Have you
Yes, we
calculated
have.
what their occupancy load is? And
We
how
do.
long-
As soon as we process the rental registration, we calculate the occupant load and we send the owner an email that says, here is your maximum occupant load. This is how many people are allowed to live here. Please don't forget, you have to also meet the requirements of the zoning code for no more than 3 unrelated. And then we go into the fact that we're going to do an inspection. Your inspector is copied on this email. Please let us know if you have any questions. That's for all new rentals.
Okay. And then I think, you know, if we don't, I guess one of the things I'm struggling about in terms of just comprehensive plan land use policy, is there any, if we don't have some sort of a rule that there be 1 household per dwelling unit, is there anything to preclude having 2 or 3 families share a house?
Square footage and occupant load.
But I mean, assuming that those were met, there would be nothing to prohibit families from, you know, doubling or tripling up. Is that?
Not that I know of, but if we're talking about the safety of the structure, then the occupant load would meet that requirement regardless of how many people are living there or their relationship.
Yeah. Well, and again, that it comes into a question of from neighborhood character and how we think of our neighborhoods. Is that something that's desirable for, you know, as part of city policy? So that's one question. I don't know if other commissioners have thoughts on that.
I noticed Ms. Flax is raising her hand.
I just wanted to make a point that right now we have a type B family that says 2 unrelated persons and their children living together as a single housekeeping unit. I mean, I think that, you know, we kind of run into the same issue, you know, how are we going to figure out, is 2 okay, but not 3? And, you know, it depends on the building and all sorts of other things. I think that when you say how many families can live together, I think that basically what we're looking at is what HUD looks at when it looks at occupancy, which is a household. And a household isn't defined by the relationships of the number of people. It's simply defined by the number of human beings that are living together. And I quite honestly think that is an appropriate way to approach things, because no matter how many ways we try to look at definitions of family, they change constantly, and they're different by different groups based on their heritage and their experience. And there are people who simply consider people that they have relationships with that are important to them that may not be related by blood, marriage, or adoption to be their family members. They may call them that. And I thought that the commissioner's point about expanding family, you know, no matter what we do, if we try to just make it include everything, then it no longer is anything, one could argue. So I don't know, I think that's a challenging thing with that term.
I think that that's kind of why, you know, to get to your point about getting closer to the HUD definition, that's why I suggested the changes that I did. Because I think that, you know, there's kind of a relationship, you know, a chosen family, people choosing to be, you know, each other's family, as opposed to just individuals who are sharing, you know, rent to make, you know, living here more affordable.
But using that exact same logic, by trying to fit everybody into a family, the definition of the type C definition of family is a group of not more than 3 unrelated persons living together as a single housekeeping unit in a dwelling unit. They may have no relationship to each other at all. Joe can be from California, Sally can be from Connecticut, and Mary can be from downstate. And their relationship is none of them can live on their own and afford it. So they're going to live together and create a household unit, but there is no relationship between them. So the fact that when you use a term like family, you think of a relational bond to one another that doesn't exist even by the definition of a type C family under our own ordinance.
Yeah, well, I'm suggesting that the type A family, however it is defined, ought to have that kind of mutual, you know, relationship where you're taking care of each other, which is, you know, an unrelated, the type C family where it's an unrelated individuals, where it could be from all over, where they really don't have any responsibility to each other. So I think that there are 2 different situations. And I also would note that, you know, if you look at the American Community Survey data, how you know, which is essentially the census, how they calculate, you know, people living in households, they've got categories for, you know, spouse. They've actually added cohabiting, you know, people as family. They've got kids, you know, child, they've got other relatives, and then they've got unrelated individuals. So, you know, the census, you know, does kind of make those distinctions in how households are counted and enumerated now. So that's just, you know, another point to think about. And then my final question, if we go the route that's suggested in alternative 1, what happens to the definitions that we have in place in the regulations for group houses, group homes, and rooming houses? Are those definitions needed? And if so, why? If we're not regulating, you know, if the only regulation is by the load and the capacity of an individual building, and is that a desirable thing to be doing?
That is a good point. That would be something that we look at for some of those uses. I think there are also other items that are associated with them, like it may be a use for like a group home with something with children that has an actual staff member on site or something like that. If it's something that's specific like that, that might be an instance where we keep that particular definition. But if it's something that's a little bit more general, where there isn't necessarily programming associated with it, then you might have to reconsider what those definitions are.
You know, when I looked at the you know, and it's been a while since I've looked at the group home definition, but the type 1, the 4 to 8 people are allowed in all, you know, they're permitted uses in all of our residential districts. And as I recall, the only requirement was there be supervision, not necessarily on-site supervision, but, you know, some sort of programming, which is kind of why when the Connections for the Homeless were discussing their art house property, I thought that actually would be an appropriate group home use. While I presume they don't need on-site, somebody living on site with the the young adults who are, the formerly homeless youth going through their transition program. I presume that there is some level of supervision and mentoring and staff support for those individuals. But that's something that, again, the concern that I have on eliminating the definition of family altogether is that there are these kind of maybe unintended consequences, or at least things that may need to change as well. And so I think that those conclude my comments on alternative 1. Questions? Does anyone else have anything for alternative 1?
I mean, I don't want to jump in if there's other commissioners who have not spoken who have thoughts, but I don't see anybody raising a hand or anything, so I'll go ahead. I mean, I think alternative 1 is a strong option. I think that there are ways to address the issues that come into play here. I think like I said, I think the use of the word family is confusing in and of itself, as opposed to using terms like household and things like that. I think when we look at other types of housing, such as group homes, rooming houses, things like that, there are rules in place that make getting those applications or those licenses a little more strict than just making a rental apartment. So I think alternative 1 is a very strong option and something that I would be in favor of looking into a little more detail on.
Okay, I guess then let's move to alternative 2 if no one else has anything to discuss. And I think I have a really kind of a question as to why the number 8 was picked. The proposal was to go from 3 unrelated to 8 unrelated, I presume. And why that number and not a different number?
Sorry. I think there were 1 or 2 examples where this was a number that was chosen. Again, this I think goes back to some earlier discussions from some years ago. That was also made a consideration with regards to increasing that maximum amount. It looks like Sarah has some additional comments.
Yeah, I think that it was an attempt to get to a threshold based on other places that had similar regulations that seemed to be a large number of people relative to. So, I don't think there's an absolute reason for 8 other than it's, the pretty good size, pretty good size household. Yeah, I mean, but also, it is a substantial number of people. But I did also want to make a quick point about rooming houses. Rooming houses also don't necessarily have kitchen facilities and things like that the roomers are in. So there are some differences in what rooming houses provide to just lots of people living in more people living in a house.
That was kind of my other question. Can someone please explain what the difference is between a rooming house and just a large single house that people are sharing? And why would we need to have, why would we need to go, require or permit rooming houses in every zoning district? I'm just kind of, I'm trying to grapple with what the alternative 2 is really trying to do.
Well, I can attempt to address some of that. One of the things about the rooming houses is right now is they are only allowed in higher higher density residential areas. And so one of the things, an interesting note in our definition of family, our D definition that was for REBA fellowship, interestingly enough, they are not allowed to have that type of family in a R1 or R2. Plus, there's some very interesting notes on how many cars they can have, that household can have. So, I mean, that particular thing I thought was really quite weird in our code. But I think that one of the things about rooming houses, because we looked at this in our, when we're overall looking at our housing planning, the definition of rooming house is really archaic and needs to be looked at separately, frankly. There are funny things in there, like how often the proprietor of the rooming house has to provide clean linens and towels, which to my knowledge is not being done in any place. And I honestly think that one of the things that we might want to look at is looking at housing types now referred to as co-housing and things like that, which are really much more of interest and are actually growing, especially in Europe, but growing as in certain parts of this country as ways of providing people different lifestyles. And those can be, there are a range of what falls under co-housing, but it doesn't necessarily mean everybody, some of them have very specific requirements. You have to be the one who hosts the family meal, the household meal every however often. I mean, they're constructed very differently and have different ideas on how their responsibilities are very set, sometimes have very set rules on what the individual's responsibilities are to the well-being of the co-housing household. So that's really a kind of a different issue, but I do think from a housing evaluation, it needs to be looked at, but I don't think it's immediately relevant to the part of the code that we're talking about right now.
But if you went with alternative B, it would be very relevant, because you'd be all of a sudden suggesting that rooming houses should be allowed in all zoning districts. And I think it's not entirely clear to me, even in reading this, I've read both the requirements for the rooming house occupancy, which is in a different, it's in the housing regulations. And I've read the definition that's in the zoning ordinance, and it's not entirely clear what we're talking about. So I guess one piece of information that would be helpful is, how many rooming houses do we have in town? I mean, they're licensed, so we ought to know the number, and they're inspected. And, and so they're in continuing the discussion, if this is a direction, we ought to know, that ought to be part of the broader discussion of how this major change would be implemented.
If we were to go with the alternative 2, you're right, we would have to really look at updating what a rooming house is, and it would, I think, be very different from the current rooming house, because it is simply a way of it would be a way of reviewing who could be just family size or household sizes living in a single dwelling unit that have over a certain number of people, not necessarily family related or anything like that. But it also doesn't preclude having something that is more like co-housing or a different structure that wouldn't necessarily be covered. At the time that the 8 people living in a dwelling unit, that was to provide a way of looking at how many people are there and the space. I don't believe we had really, we do know that we would have to look at how rooming house is defined, but we haven't done that at this time. And you're right, if we were really to pursue that, we would have to come back with more information for you.
But according to code currently, a rooming house is not a dwelling unit.
Correct. That's what I was saying. It is a current rooming house is you're renting individual rooms and they
Right.
don't necessarily have access to, you know, it even says if they can have shared bathrooms and stuff
Right.
like that.
It's not unlike a hotel or a motel type
Exactly.
situation.
And most of the rooming houses we have right now, I believe, are actually things like some of the sorority and fraternity houses, I believe, are classified as rooming houses. Are they not, Angel?
Rooming houses right now are hotels, they're sororities and fraternities, they're the on-campus student housing that is maintained by Northwestern. And then I believe we have probably, I'm gonna go off the top of my head because I don't have it in front of me, I'm sorry, probably 10, maybe, licensed rooming houses that are not hotels or sororities or fraternities.
We
So
have
it's not
very
a
few.
lot.
Yeah,
We have
right.
very few when you take out the hotels and the dorms
Yes.
that are classified as rooming houses.
And why would we want to extend rooming houses into every district again with alternative to? Why that change?
The purpose there was just to have to look at larger households and have some additional oversight in some way, shape, or form of them.
Was this going back, because one of the real early discussions, or maybe even, I'm trying to remember, maybe the first zoning committee meeting where there was a suggestion that you go with essentially alternative 1, but, you know, and then have a maximum of no more than 8 people in a dwelling unit, period, which I raised concerns about the possibility of having large traditional families, which suddenly you'd have a single family, you know, a real traditional family occupying a single family dwelling unit. And if they have an extra kid, they're suddenly over the 8-person limit. And, you know, the suggestion was, you know, well, they can get a rooming house license, which, you know, that I find problematic on many levels, fair housing being one of them, and discriminating against family units. And actually that point was made in some of the background material that was you know, provided, that I reread this afternoon. That actually was a concern about whether or not that would stand up to legal scrutiny. But I think, you know, just for number 2, I mean, I think that allow, you know, that you know, the 8-person limit, I find that problematic. I don't know what the right number is, but that troubles me.
Well, I'll admit, I don't personally think it's a good solution. It was an alternative. I find many of those same problems and they would have to be worked out, but it was an attempt to give some alternatives for consideration.
All right, well, I appreciate that. And that's kind of why
I'll be frank.
The type A family definition, because I think that's, you know, getting to the functional family to deal with the different kinds of partnerships, people, you know, how they create families today is kind of an important thing. And I think there is a distinction between, you know, 5 people from 5 different states deciding to live together to, you know, share expenses versus a household where there's some sort of, you know, real relationship, you know, either, you know, by blood or they've chosen to be individual, you know, their own family.
And yet under the ordinance, we define all of them as families.
Well, yeah, there are different situations. And I think that's, you know, and, you know, even if you go back to the Belterre definition where it was, you can be related by blood, marriage, or adoption, that's one, or you can be 2 people living together that you're not related. So, and I think that one of the things I think is kind of nice about Evanston's definition is we do say, the 4 different categories say that there are 4 different kinds of households that, we all consider families and perfectly acceptable. We even have the type B family is a situation where we are acknowledging and allowing a co-housing option. 2 single parents and their kids, so they are a family under our definition.
But it seems to me we could just as easily say it was fine, because if the dwelling unit could accommodate
Yeah, but what if
however many people?
Yeah, well, what if there are 10? Again, that's kind of why I think it's good to have some flexibility with certain of those definitions, where you're not counting the number of people. Obviously, there are the capacity limits under the property maintenance code, but I think I'd also like to point out that the property maintenance code standards really are minimum requirements. I've got a very small 3-bedroom house. I can have 7 adults living with 1 bathroom and small, very small rooms. And I could, extend a hall and I could probably have 9. Would not be desirable, but, I think that there's, when we're looking at the standards, I think we have to go back to what, the comprehensive plan, which we haven't discussed in a long time, and what are our neighborhoods, should they be, what is their character? It gets down to, so I think those are considerations that have to be part of the discussion. And as I kind of noted at the beginning, I think that we're going to have to acknowledge that there are a lot of pieces to this discussion, not all of which relate to the zoning ordinance and, if we have a definition of family and what should it be. So other commissioners, I've been monopolizing this conversation.
Is it possible to make a distinction between intentional families, that is, groups of people who do come together for housing and also have a connection between them, and people who are simply sharing the dwelling unit for a short time? I can see the problem that you keep splicing the definition of family and keep pulling it further and further apart. It just seems to me that what we're wrestling with is trying to meet the needs of folks who do have relationships, who do have an extended family and are trying to find the right housing for that. But you counter that with the fact that as a university town, we have a constituency of students, let's be honest about it, who will just want to room together to share costs and to minimize those costs. And there's a difference there as to how we want to accommodate them, I think. And even in the material that we got before the meeting, they talk about the experiences in Boston and other towns in Ames, Iowa, where there is this back and forth between town and gown and trying to preserve needs and meet the needs of constituents within neighborhoods who want to have families there versus a short-term student housing setup. And I guess the question is, can we come up with something that makes sense to divide those 2 categories?
I like your notion of intentional family. That's a good term. Other commissioners? Okay.
I mean, I'll just say I'm not a big fan of alternative 2 at all. I think it's kind of a situation where we've created an alternative, no offense, Ms. Flax, but we have created an alternative for the sake of having an alternative. But there are lots of issues I see in that, from the random number of 8 to rooming houses being permitted everywhere, sort of thing. So I am not a huge fan of alternative number 2.
No offense taken. I don't think I actually came up with it. It was come up with quite a while ago.
I would agree with that. I think alternative two is there's so many problems with it. I still like alternative one, as for the reasons that I said earlier. The only thing that I would say about alternative one is that I think the way of calculating square footage, and someone brought up number of bathrooms and other things that I think maybe it should be revisited. But otherwise, I like the spirit of alternative one.
Okay, is there any other commission discussion?
Just to get the better sense, Commissioner Linwell, you mentioned earlier the ripple effect that the elimination of the family definition will have on other areas, ADUs, et cetera. How is that going to be resolved if we were to move forward with an alternative one type of scenario?
I don't know. And I think that that's one of the reasons that until the city council can have a broader discussion of how what the potential impacts would be on other aspects of the zoning ordinance, I think it's premature for us to move forward. One of the things that we had asked, the zoning committee level, I think pretty much at least two of the meetings, was for staff to provide specifics on where family is mentioned, and also I think going along with that now, what would be the impact, what would be the ripple effect? Because I don't think, I am not comfortable with proceeding with the suggesting that we shouldn't. We should eliminate the family definition without knowing all of those things. I personally am in support of retaining the family definition. As I mentioned, I would expand the type A family so we get something more, so it's closer to kind of various kinds of intentional families, as Commissioner Westerberg was describing. And I also think we need to kind of grapple with how extensive are types of co-housing are we comfortable with? Is it okay for 2 or 3 unrelated families to share a dwelling unit if the space allows, or is that kind of a bridge too far for the community? And I think that ends up needing to be a community discussion. So my personal preference would be that we kind of, if we do anything, would be to retain the definition of family, addressing, kind of expanding the type A definition and cleaning up the occupancy rules that talk about servants, because that's clearly, archaic language at this point. And waiting until the city council and the community has had that broader discussion of what the strategy should be, because the other issue that we discussed at the zoning committee that we haven't discussed really here is really the fact that with the student households, what has happened is that you have property owners who have purchased larger single family houses near campus with the intent of leasing them to large groups of university students and charging between $6,000 and $8,000 a month in rent, which is a level that is not affordable for the typical 1 or 2 income family. And and we have a fairly limited supply of dwelling units with more than 3 bedrooms. Some of the 30,000 dwelling units that we have in Evanston, nearly 19,000 of them have 2 or fewer bedrooms. So they're studios, 1, 2, or 3 bedrooms. So if you're trying to deal with affordable housing, or just housing that's capable of accommodating larger families, if the supply is taken by students who are banding together in groups of 5 or 6 to afford these higher rents that landlords are asking, we're really kind of working against affordable housing. So that's, that's a part of the discussion that we talked about a bit in committee, but it's not really necessarily relevant to the changes in the zoning definition, but it certainly is a policy question. So,
in doing just kind of a quick search through the code online, in the zoning code, there are 95 mentions of the word family. And I would say just a brief count here, I didn't do any sort of magical calculation, but I would say that 98% of these refer to single family, two family, those sorts of things, family necessity, things like that.
Yeah.
And not relating to the definition of family itself.
Right. That was kind of my, when I did the same exercise, that was my conclusion. But there are, as I mentioned, there's the ADU provision, and then there's the provision in the Fair Housing Code. But you're right, most of them don't. But again, if we, but there are other things that are related, like the definition of group homes and maybe not rooming houses, but certainly the definition of group homes. And I think you would have to look at what the potential impacts, what other parts of the code are impacted. I mean, you can't just go through and say, well, we'll just delete any reference to family.
So I did the same exercise with the zoning code, and Commissioner Rogers is correct that a lot of the reference is it's essentially to the actual building. So single family, multifamily, two family, things of that nature. And there are some references to familial status or mentioning a family for family necessity, and things of that nature. We do understand that this would not simply be changing one section of the code and then just deleting something. We would have to take a deeper look at where family is referenced and adjust as need be, and look at other portions of the code that might mention family or mention that portion of the zoning code that would need to be adjusted to fit whatever alternative ends up being adopted. So that's an exercise that we already know that we're going to have to do, and that would take some time to do.
So a quick question for you, Ms. Jones. If we were to eliminate the definition in the zoning ordinance of a family, how does that impact a zoning a health and sanitation under Title 8 definition of family?
So again, that would also be something that we need to make sure, because
so is every definition of the word family in our entire ordinance, Title 1 through Title 11, based on this 618.3 definition of families?
No, I think there are some sections that have their own particular definitions. There are definitely some titles that directly reference the zoning code.
So this is not a Jenga block that if we pull out, the entire tower tumbles.
We don't know that.
Yeah, not completely.
It would have to be evaluated.
We would absolutely have to go through the code to make sure that we aren't.
For example, the fair house, excuse
reference.
me, the fair housing section has in its definition section a specific definition of family, and that is linked to the federal fair housing. So that would not be changed. But otherwise,
how is that tied into section 618.3? The fair housing ordinance, how is that tied into 618.3?
There's only a part in our code that references it because it's our definition. It cross-reference. Commissioner Lindwall pointed that out, but that would be changed. We wouldn't have to have that reference then. But the definition of family per the I have that in my pile of paper here if I can find the right thing.
Yeah, I had it too. Here.
Do you know the code section? Because if so, I've got the online code up. I can,
It's in the housing regulations. It is the fair housing ordinance. And it's under the definitions.
so it's under chapter 5 of title 5.
Mhm.
Oh, here it is. It's under the definition section, and we have a definition for dwelling unit, which is
Mhm.
a room or group of rooms designed for occupancy by one family with eating, sleeping, and living facilities or lodging rooms as defined in Evanston zoning ordinance Title 6 of this code.
Yes,
So
that's the cross reference. And that could be, if we eliminated that definition, that could be just simply a dwelling unit for a household is what I
Yeah.
would do with something like that.
yeah, but still, then we're back to the zoning code, where if you eliminate and say we're not going to define family, or we're not going to define what constitutes a household, then you still, you're still kind of in a potential at least an ambiguity as to what you're talking about. So it kind of gets back to, how many families or how many households can live in a dwelling unit?
Well, I mean, if you follow the HUD definition, the people living in a single dwelling unit are a household. I mean, that's what a household is. So that would be what I would recommend. You're not trying to, I mean, that's the definition of a household.
Yeah, just one household per.
Right. So if the max occupancy load for a dwelling unit were 5, I'm just making this up, then a household of no more than 5 people could reside there. I mean, I think that would be easy enough to put that sort of definition of household into an appropriate part of the code. I'm not quite sure where. That's why we have our legal staff to do that.
I guess the question is this a premature discussion, given that all these issues are still out there? And if one were inclined to support alternative 1, as I am, is this really, I personally wouldn't feel comfortable moving in that direction without having a good sense of what the ripple effects are, or not. I mean, that's what I'm sort of grappling with. Is this really premature until we've sort of have a better understanding for some of these consequences in other areas?
I agree with that, but can't we vote on a direction with the understanding? Let's say we vote on alternative 1 with the understanding that this has got to be played out throughout the zoning code and to see what the impact is. And if there is a significant impact that can't be resolved, and I frankly cannot believe that it can't be, there's going to be issues that can't be resolved. I think you guys we're talking about these silly little things that there's easy solutions to. So I really don't think that we're going to come up with anything, but we can vote on a policy or a direction with the understanding that that would have to be all checked out, which is fine. But I mean, we're just going round and round in circles on this issue. It seems to me.
I would agree with that. And I think we need to move in a direction and allow that to happen. I mean, we keep talking about premature discussions, but we just keep having discussions. And so unless there is a direction to the discussion, and I think that comes from having something put forward in writing and a direction based off of how that's going to impact other areas, then we can have an informed discussion about a particular topic as opposed to just a random discussion on the policy.
Can we move on a vote? Are we ready for that? I mean, I don't know why we need to have any more discussion, but that's just my impatience, I guess.
And again, this is
Excuse me, Chairperson, can we have public comment? I signed up to speak about this issue, and I would like to make my public comment about this issue before you vote.
Okay,
We do
actually,
have a
we have
sign
several
in,
people
a
signed
sign
up.
up sheet that I sent.
Yes,
Chairman.
so we'll start with that and then I will add you, Tina. So first on our list is Karen Nelson. Are you here?
Hi, it's Karen. Sorry, I'm putting my children to bed.
Oh,
Give
all right.
me 30. You want to go to someone else second and I'll be
Yes,
second when
but
I
we'll
run
come
downstairs
back
and-
to you.
Okay.
Larry Donahue.
Hi, thank you, Chair Lindwall. I submitted some comments in writing earlier today. I hope you all had a chance to read them. I essentially support alternative 1, and I agree with the comments that we just heard. There's been a lot of discussion, and it's really time to vote. I support alternative 1. I think that's a very reasonable approach. Thank you.
Okay, Rob Biesenbach. See you on the line?
I saw him in the list earlier.
Oh, there he is. He's muted. Rob, would you like to?
Yes, I apologize.
All right.
Also kid issues. Yeah, I've been in this meeting before and I just feel it's important to continue to get on the record the real world impacts that these proposed changes will have specifically on the neighborhoods adjacent to the university. I have a flyer in my hands, but I've redacted it. One of my neighbors received this from a real estate agent. Hope all is well with you and your family. I'm a recent graduate of Northwestern University and a local real estate professional. Several buyers are interested in living around the Northwestern campus, including me. And your home fits our geographic criteria. If you're interested, I would love to set up a time to meet. Now, I don't know this enterprising young gentleman. It's possible that he wants to buy the home near the university in order to provide affordable housing for Evanston residents. Somehow, I doubt it, mainly because this is not an isolated circumstance. Neighbor after neighbor on block after block surrounding the university have been inundated with pitches from real estate prospectors. Phone calls, doorbells, flyers, postcards, and all the rest. And they're getting that kind of attention because of this very discussion. I think the real estate prospectors, they smell money. And they know that this will open up, it will serve up this neighborhood on a silver platter to them. They'll come in and do what they've been doing, buy up these big homes, carve them into tiny chunks, not make affordable housing, but rent them out to students at more than $1,000 a pop. And I know zoning is one piece of this, but it has a huge impact. And I know there's been discussion about enforcement mechanisms and stepped up penalties, which absolutely is necessary because enforcement has been lacking in the past. But I think, as we all know, where money is involved, people will find creative ways around the rules. So I just continue to urge everyone to please, please really make sure we understand this issue and the real world impacts. And what will happen to the area around the university, it will be given over to off-campus student housing, and it will become a nonstop 24/7 beer pong and all-night rager party in this neighborhood. And there won't be, that many residents living here anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up on my list is David Gillihan. I hope I pronounced that right.
Hi there, thank you, Commissioner. So my name is David Gillihan. I'm a Northwestern graduate, undergrad and graduate school, and I am a landlord in the area. So I just wanted to make sure that I was senior as well and let everybody know that's been talking about absentee landlords and profiteering, that is not representative of many in the landlords in the area, myself included. I understand that there are exceptions to the rules, that there are bad actors, that there are bad landlords, and there are bad tenants in some of these buildings, but I will say in my case that I feel very proud to say that I'm contributing to the neighborhood. In my case, I've purchased properties and invested heavily into them to make them nicer than they ever were before. I do rent to students. I don't have complaints about my student tenants. I don't profit greatly off of the students. I know that they're paying less rent by living in my properties than they would be by paying $2,300 a month for a single one-bedroom unit in E2. So I do think there is a benefit to it. I think that there are other ways to handle disciplinary issues or issues like parking that have been brought up besides taking care of it through zoning. So I'm very much in favor of modernizing the rule and taking care of issues that are related to conduct and other things outside of the zoning, and would be in favor of something like an alternative one. Thank you.
Okay, next up, how about Tina Payton?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Okay, so I have several comments to make and questions. So as far as the occupancy limit of 8 for any family is not reasonable, and I agree with Chair, it would be discriminatory. So some of you may or may not know me. I'm Tina Payton. My family has owned and operated real estate here in Evanston for over 50 years. We provide student housing as well. We have many of our units are affordable housing. So in one of our situations, we rented to a family of 9. We have a large 4-bedroom, and they were through the Connections for the Homeless TBER program. So if you're saying family of 8, then you've already disqualified someone who is for affordable housing program here in Evanston. And as you know, it's very hard to find 3- and 4-bedroom units for affordable housing programs here in Evanston. So you have already eliminated large families on such a short availability list. Also, I think this discussion about lifting and you can have 8 or 9 people in the house. So the gentleman that just spoke, yes, you may be a landlord here in Evanston. Like myself, I try to follow the rules here. I'm heavily inspected. And there are a lot of absentee landlords in the 1st and 5th Ward, Maple, Garnett, Foster, Pratt. The city knows this, and they are neglecting to inspect these landlords. Of course, there's even on a listing, you can go out there right now and see that there's homes for rent. They've cut it up into 6 to 10 bedrooms and renting it out for $8,000 to $10,000 a month. You know that's not a single family person renting a house for $10,000 a month. So it is up to the city of Evanston to do inspection and not calling these rooming houses or whatever. There's a lot of complaints in the ward, the 1st and 5th Ward, and there's no inspection. So I disagree also with you wanting to add another inspector for low income housing. That is unfair. I rent to a lot of low income housing, and I'm regularly inspected by the city, Section 8, Connections, whatever program I'm doing. And you're not inspecting the people that are violating, which is traditionally in the 1st or 5th Ward around campus. So that should not be. Also, you need to tell the landlord when a family member is being added to the household. So sometimes there's someone who is pregnant, or they're bringing in other people into the household. So sometimes there's a complaint at the building, and an inspector comes out unannounced to the landlord, and there may be 10 people in the household at the time of the inspection, but there may be only 4 people on the lease. So now you have sent a violation to me as a landlord, and you don't even know the circumstance. So it's very important to coordinate with the inspector and miscellaneous complaints. Also, for the nuisance ordinance of 3 or more complaints in 12 months, you may have a disgruntled tenant in the building, which has happened to me over the last year. And during COVID, as you know, it's a moratorium on evictions. So some tenants decide to say and do what they want to and just randomly call the city of Evanston and make complaints when they're being excused from the apartment. And so that needs to be revisited also. So you need to stop picking and choosing who you want to make the rules for, because this is just a bonanza for just what a previous speaker spoke about, buying big property, single family homes, chopping it up and allowing them to break the rules because you don't inspect. This needs to be fair and equitable inspections and rules across the board, not just for some people. And when you're making these rules and regulations, why don't you consult with some landlords who this will affect? I do have just a couple of more things to say. You're talking.
Yeah, can you wrap up though?
Yes, I am, because I want to. Okay, so I'm also discussing boarded up housing on Jackson and Emerson. That's a perfect example of code violations not being followed. You're only supposed to have a board up here in Evanston for 6 months. These properties have been boarded up, 6 of them all together, for over 1 year. It's been about 1.5 years since they've been boarded up. So this is a perfect example of you're making up rules and not following through. I have spoken at this meeting and many other meetings, city council. I've asked everyone to follow up on this and no action. So I'm asking you to consider that you need to think these policies over, and violations should go to the appropriate parties, enforced all across the board, fair and equitable, because this is what you all are claiming, that you want to be fair and equitable. Then I suggest you consider what you're doing here tonight. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Can I go back to Karen Nelson? Are you back now?
Yes, I'm here.
All right, I'll go back, circle back. I still have a couple more people with hands raised, but
sure.
I'll go with you.
So thank you. So I want to, I've had a lot of conversations over the last month with many of my neighbors. We all agree that affordable housing should be improved in Evanston, but I think the goals can be accomplished in a much more narrowly tailored way. As written, neither of the two alternatives proposed by the city will address the concerns that have been repeatedly raised by the residents that surround Northwestern University. Both of the proposed changes will unquestionably result in a disproportional and adverse impact on the neighborhoods around the campus. As most of my neighbors mentioned in the last meeting and in this article that was provided in the meeting packet, these neighborhoods will have a direct and immediate impact that will not be to increase affordable housing to Evanston residents, but will be for landlords to convert large single family homes into student housing. The result unquestionably will be a rapid turnover in these wet neighborhoods from single family homes to de facto student dorms. I'm a resident of the First Ward, and I'm also an attorney. I've experienced reviewing zoning laws and applying them in other circumstances. In the past month, in my personal capacity, I reviewed dozens of zoning ordinances from college towns around the country. I have a vested interest in this, so I'm very passionate about reviewing these ordinances, and I'm doing this on my own time. Nearly all of these towns recognize the impact that student housing has on the community, and most, almost overwhelmingly, have versions that limit dwellings to either 3 or 4 unrelated adults. Commissioner Westerberg and Lindwall both recognized that there are potential alternatives. I specifically liked the Boston ordinance that offers additional flexibility to non-traditional families by limiting them to a 4 unrelated rule. limiting the 4 unrelated rule to student housing. I noted in the memo that the came with the packet that the city had noted that the court overturned that rule, but respectfully, I read that case. It doesn't even address the Boston ordinance. And the Boston ordinance as it stands still stands today. It says that they're limiting dwellings to no more than 4 undergrads. Additionally, I looked at the Decatur statute related to that talked about this unusual 8 unrelated, which again, I think is an outlier based on the research I did on my own time. And looking at ordinances across the country at various different college towns, even that ordinance talked about limitations as to student housing, specifically dormitories, which honestly, when you have a large house that could potentially have 10 or 11 people, Commissioner Lindwall talked about her own house, about how you could add a little bit, add walls here and there and make a 3-bedroom house into a 7-bedroom house. I think that's very much the case in most of the houses along Orrington Avenue. Though that Decatur ordinance specifically excludes dormitories, fraternities, and sororities. Finally, I think, there's, to Commissioner Lindwall's point earlier today, how many houses are we really talking about here that will be impacted by this rule? How many, what inequities are going to be addressed by changing the 3 unrelated? How many homes are there where there are, most of the houses in Evanston have 3 or less bedrooms. What you're talking about is the large single family homes. There are a lot of them around Northwestern, both to the west of Northwestern and to the south of Northwestern. Those homes are currently being bought up right now by people who know that the city does not enforce the 3 unrelated rule. And they are being converted. There you have wealthy out-of-town investors. You have wealthy out-of-town families who are buying homes for their children who go to Northwestern and will, with the intention of having their child and 6 or 7 of their friends live in the house. What is the impact to our community based off these conversions of these homes? You will have families who will leave the area. You've already seen that in places like around Fireman's Park, where there's an extensive number of student homes. Families don't live there anymore. There's a lot less families that in that area. I think you will see that happen in other parts of Evanston around the campus. And so I think, I will urge this commission to pause to better understand what impact this will really have on the community. Because my concern is that in this area, what will happen is not affordable housing. People who want affordable housing can't afford the $1,000 a month that students will pay. As the article that the city provided in the packet illustrates, these students will pay $1,000 a month. I looked at the Northwestern average, room and board amounts. They're paying $1,000 a month for room and board. If you have 8 or 10 students in these homes, they are going to outbid every single time Evanston residents who may want to rent these homes or buy these homes. It's just a simple matter of economics. So again, I urge this committee to pause to better understand the impact that this will have to the community. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have Joseph Kaczynski.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Commissioner. First of all, I want to agree with Ms. Tina. I'm sorry, Ms. Tina, I didn't get your last name, regarding the inadequacy of inspections. The current family rule is not enforced, and that has led to the detriment of the neighborhoods adjacent to Northwestern. I'm requesting that we enforce the current rule before we do any changes, and or develop a plan on how to address the problems that you're hearing coming from residents that are around Northwestern. I'm a CPA, and this is kind of an application of internal control. It really is unwise to eliminate a control without imposing first some kind of compensating control. As Robin mentioned, there's been a recent increase of investors who have ignored the family rules, and other rules, such as even permit construction. And this really just kind of demonstrates the inadequacy of information to buyers of these large homes. We have one around the corner, next door to you, Commissioner, who wasn't even aware that there were changes in the lessors, the lessees of her building. And you know, we get all the beer pong and all the noise and loud music. Without some kind of compensating control, we are likely in the current environment to further expand the disruptive student housing, which is out of character with the neighborhood. Lastly, I agree with Commissioner Linwall about unintended consequences of eliminating the family rule, family definition and the family rule. And I would urge the commission to study this further and understand the possible consequences of the rule change. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I have Council Member Kelly. Welcome to our commission meeting.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I have one question, well, I have a couple of questions, but it does say this was for discussion. Does that mean, so it is just for discussion, no action tonight, no voting?
No, I mean, we might, you know, kind of take a straw poll as to kind of which of the alternatives are acceptable, but no
Okay.
action.
Okay, great. So yeah, so I do also concur with Ms. Nelson and Mr. Beisenbach, as well as Ms. Payton. I do think we have some very serious issues right now that we have to address in order to, I mean, the goals might be noble. I assume this is all about affordable housing, right? I think that's what this discussion is about, providing affordable housing. But in fact, I think as we examine the potential impact, we'll see that it's going to do anything but provide more affordable housing. In this area, in the first ward, we see that landlords, particularly absentee landlords who don't live in Evanston, are taking in $12,000, $13,000, $14,000, $15,000 a month, as it is right now with our current policy. And I think we have to be very careful, because once we change that, we have to understand what's going to happen. That's going to increase. It's going to become even more expensive and make housing even less affordable. So I really, I feel it's so important that we can, it said tonight that this was supposed to be a discussion of a clarification of our end goals, and that's fine. Like I think in my ward, everybody that I've talked to, and believe me, since I took on this role, every single day, I've been dedicating many hours to this issue. This is an extreme problem in this ward, where we do have, and it is related predominantly to absentee landlords and to student housing. And I also have firsthand experience. My son, who graduated from Northwestern, lived in 2 of these off-campus housing places that were turned into multi-unit dwellings, one on Maple, a famous house. And by the way, it was a frat house, but it wasn't a rooming house. It was a house simply converted into a frat house that, from everything I could tell, it looked like it had never been inspected. When I went to his floor, where he had three people living on every, there were more though, there were more than 3 on every floor. So, upwards of 10 people on his floor. He had some weird contraption plugged into the wall outside his bedroom. And I said, Gus, what is that? He said, I don't know. It looked like an easy bake oven that was plugged in to sort of create a unit. And this is a problem. That landlord owns many homes and is collecting large amounts of money. And there were many young men packed into this house. And it really is essential that we talk about both the absentee landlord, with the exception of Mr. Gil Ohan. And by the way, Mr. and I'm sorry about my pronunciation. I would love to meet you, and I'd love to see your homes at some point. But it is essential. These are young adults who've never lived on their own. Most of them, they're living on their own for the first time. And these are landlords who predominantly do not live in Evanston. And that's why we see in some cities, such as Providence, Rhode Island, there have actually been ordinances created that actually target or incorporate absentee landlords and student housing. And I think that is, we have to address that if we're going to be realistic about the situation. If we're simply going to change this rule without considering impact, then please keep in mind we are not, in fact, if we aren't addressing all the issues that Ms. Payton talked about, that Ms. Nelson talked about, we aren't in fact really looking to create more affordable units. And we also need to address the ADU ordinance that was recently passed. That ordinance is just now starting to come into play and we're seeing right now an uptick in absentee landlords buying up homes because guess what? Now, in essence, one can create a multi-unit house, a multi-unit dwelling by working around it by creating internal ADU. And we're seeing that in this ward. Just by, it's not that much different from creating a multi-unit dwelling within a single family resident zone by calling it an internal ADU. Just means you have to segment some part of the first floor, whatever floor you're creating it off that isn't part of that ADU. If that makes sense. So suddenly we're seeing that we can have homes converted this way. So they could be allowed to, have up to six students living in a house, which we've seen over and over and over again, violation of occupancy. So right now, I ask that we hold off. I think it is very premature to be moving forward on this. I think we really need to understand the implications. I think we need to do things like look first before we go forward on something like this, which will explode in terms, if we go forward and allow, increasing the number of unrelated people in house, we have landlords that are just waiting to move in on that. And that's really going to harm not only the integrity of our neighborhoods, it's going to harm affordability. And Dave Davis stands with me on this. We really need to see first better enforcement. We also are looking at, we all would like to see, we're considering moving forward with asking that internal ADUs be owner occupied because of the unintended impact of what's going to happen with this recently passed ordinance allowing for internal and attached ADUs. So I think we should wait to see if we're able to pass that modification to the current ADU ordinance where it's requiring internal ADUs. I think we also need to look at things like either the option to revoke rental registration or to look at perhaps having the licensing, rental licensing with the option to revoke for violation because we have violation after violation after violation from absentee landlords for occupancy. And nobody in my ward wants to evict students. I don't hear anybody wants to do that. What we want is some firm ordinance and codes and enforcement put in place. We're all about affordable housing. And oh, by the way, when you have owner occupied student housing, no, there aren't any problems. So when somebody lives in the home in this ward, it works beautifully. It's a beautiful way to provide student housing when it's owner occupied. And again, David, I know that you are definitely an exception. I look forward to visiting or at least seeing the homes that the property that you own. Also, we have, I believe, one rooming house that's actually certified or licensed as a rooming house. And that also is not a problem. From everything I've heard, this works for it very well. It's not just because it allows up to however many people, it's because there really are some strict rules. Yes, Sarah, maybe some are obsolete, but the fact that they get inspected and licensed every year, and they really do just have one kitchen, so it's not just packed full with randomly, there is a supervisor. So all of these, from what I've heard, are the rooming house in this ward actually works well. So I just really want to ask that we hold off. And there are other things we want to get in place here, like a disclosure form at the point of sale, because frequently we have landlords claiming plausible denial that when they bought it, they were told that they could do this. And of course, again, nobody wants to kick anybody out. So they're able to continue on with, households full of like 10, 11 young adults. And I think we need to have a disclosure form where they sign off, fully understanding the code and the zoning. All of these measures, disclosure forms, improving enforcement, rental registration, the option to revoke either rental registration or implementing a licensing program, waiting until see if we need to modify our current ADU ordinance so that it requires owner occupancy for internal and attached ADUs. So again, the impact is everything. As noble as it is we all want affordable housing. I think we have to be realistic that that's not what we're going to get right now if we do away with the 3-person rule. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Sue Lolabach? So you've raised your hand?
Yep. Hello, everybody. I'm Sue Lolbach. I am with Connections for the Homeless and head up our program called Joining Forces for Affordable Housing. I'd like to say that it seems that there are some sort of troubling assumptions underlying portions of the discussion tonight, as well as underlying the current code related to this as it's written. Those assumptions are that only groups of people who have an acceptable relationship with each other are acceptable households, that somehow it's appropriate and right for the city to define which relationships are acceptable and which are not, that the priority is to preserve the character of the neighborhoods that we, whoever that is, want to live in, even if people in need of housing are excluded, that students are not legitimate residents, that renters are not legitimate residents, that people who want to share housing so they can afford it are not legitimate residents, and that the city has the right to determine who is a legitimate resident. In response to these assumptions, we believe that every person deserves housing, whether they are part of a family or not. And if sharing housing with people who aren't family provides affordable opportunities, it should not be an option for the city to deny that. At the real crux of the matter, I think, and more to what some of the comments have been about, is that Northwestern only provides housing for approximately 20% of its students. The communities around Northwestern's campuses must accommodate the rest, close to 20,000 people who are not here with family members. Because of this, and because of the desperate need for more affordable units, we believe that Evanston in particular needs more rental units, both for students and for non-students. Providing more rentals could drive housing costs down, relieve the pressure on single-family owner-occupied neighborhoods, house more students, and free up more rental housing for non-students. The 3 unrelated rule is not the answer to the problem of tensions related to student and non-student housing. This tension will only be resolved when the university and the municipality together address the need for more rental housing in locations that don't pit students and non-students against each other. I'd also like to say that we do not expect the repeal of this 3 unrelated rule to create more affordable housing. We don't expect poor families who need to share costs to seek housing near the university. Rather, this law that's perceived as protecting a few neighborhoods around the university is in fact putting restraints on all neighborhoods in the city. Repealing the current ordinance will allow flexibility that is not currently possible, and not allowing it is irresponsible while we're living through a housing crisis. We support the first recommendation by staff. We urge you to approve it and to implement it as soon as possible. And in addition, we believe that the university and the city need to start a process immediately to increase the amount of rental housing available to meet the needs of both students and non-students. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think
I would like to speak. I'm Bonnie Wilson.
Hi, Bonnie.
I timed my speech for 1.5 minutes, so I will be very brief. Thank you for letting me speak. I'm Bonnie Wilson. One of the definitions of family as described in the Evanston 64-1-14 occupancy of dwelling units, excuse me, under type D, family subsections A and B. This definition of family includes a husband and wife married to one another and their children. As a tribute to Pride Month, this month of June, I feel it is important that the city of Evanston no longer uses the words husband and wife. Evanston should no longer be telling residents how they should live together and telling couples, if you are not described as a husband and wife, you are not a family. I feel it is important that the word family not be used as a definition under occupancy of dwelling units. And I agree with your I agree with you about alternate 1, that the memo that the staff sent out on June the 4th, that occupancy should be based on property standards, regulations, and increasing the number of maximum unrelated residents in a unit from 3 to 8, then making rooming houses available in all residential districts. Over occupancy would be based on the property standards, square footage requirements. This would apply both to owner occupied and rental properties. I have been a real estate agent in Evanston for the last 36 years, and what people are saying about Evanston, about real estate agents, that people are buying homes around Northwestern. These homes are over $1 million, sometimes up to $2 million. I've never seen in all my years of doing real estate that people are buying these homes for their kids and changing them to rooming houses or to rent them out. I also have a client now who would like to buy a home in Evanston with other senior single women as co-op living. Whatever that means to these women is not our concern. Evanston should only be concerned if the home meets the Evanston property standards agreements. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you. I think we'll conclude.
We actually had someone else named Lynn has raised
Oh, yes. Hi, Lynn.
her hand.
Hi. Yeah, I had signed up to talk.
Oh.
Anyway.
All right. Anyway, welcome.
I'll be quick. This is now the second meeting I've attended. I think once again, you're putting everything into a pot. Why can't affordable housing be addressed on its own, because it needs to be addressed? And those of us who our issue of, I live in the 1st ward, so I think it's the 1st ward and the 5th ward particularly. I learned tonight that the house down the block that has 9 students living, I guess I can't call it a rooming house. I don't know what you call that, but it's 9 people and 9 cars, and these people signed leases. It's truly not a family. Is this what we want in our neighborhoods? I don't, we bought our house because we wanted a single family house. This is R1 zoning. And if we're going to abolish the rules, and in particular, and I don't think the 3 unrelated is the perfect rule, but I feel that is the only thing standing between us and the complete changeover of our neighborhood. I mean, it's that simple. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think that's it. All right, so I think we now need to go back to the commission for discussion. What I would like to suggest, again, this is an item that is for discussion, so I'm not sure, I think we had a city attorney on or staff. What I would suggest is we kind of go through and indicate individually what our preferences are. We have the alternative 1, we have alternative 2, and then I had suggested the alternative 3, which was really to deal with just the definition of what the type A family is. And I think it would probably be helpful for staff and for us to just kind of explain our reasoning. And I guess I'm going to go first, and then we can go down the line. I am not in favor, I'm in favor of retaining the definition of family. And I think that the type A definition can be expanded to be more inclusive. But I think that going to alternative 1 and eliminating the family definition is problematic for a whole host of reasons. So that's my position. Commissioner Rogers, you're next up on my screen.
Oh, okay.
I think I'll just go that way.
I would like us to explore alternative one in more detail. Again, you know, a couple issues have come up in the public comment. I don't think that this rule is creating affordable housing throughout the city. I don't think that's what it's intended to do. I think it is intended to make some housing more affordable, but it's not, like I've mentioned before, I don't see affordable housing being a $1.5 million home up near the campus. You know, we've heard lots of issue about enforcement, things like that. You know, lots of that stuff falls outside of the zoning ordinance, which I don't believe is our purview. I mean, yes, it's things that we do will affect it, but that really is up to the city to figure out how to make everything work together. Our particular concern is in Title VI of the zoning ordinance. And then, you know, I keep hearing, you know, developers are snatching up properties. Developers can only buy what people are willing to sell. And so if people in the neighborhood are selling to developers, they are changing the neighborhood that they are leaving. This isn't a situation where developers are using some form of eminent domain to lay claim to properties. So I think this really is a situation where people in the neighborhood need to have serious conversations with their neighbors about properties and who they're willing to sell to and how that will impact their neighborhood. But all of that aside, I think alternative one is really the direction that I would like to see us moving in.
Thank you. Commissioner Hugo, you're next up on my screen.
Yeah, I am inclined to support alternative one. I really found the arguments that Sue Lulbach, I believe, made for me resonated, and in addition to what Commissioner Rogers has just indicated. So I'm inclined to support alternative one.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Westerberg.
You know, my problem with alternative one continues to be the fact that you are removing a definition that provides perhaps an artificial structure, but there is nothing to take its place, which does not face some of the realities of what is going on in a couple of the districts of the city. And I totally agree, the city doesn't have the right to define what's an appropriate family, who should be part of that appropriate family, but we need something else to realize that there's going to be an impact to removing that protection. And there's no substitute for the university and the city working together to build or to find a way to provide additional housing. But that's obviously a long-standing effort that needs to take place, and it takes a long time. And I do think you need to dig into protection for these two districts. We've talked on the zoning committee before about overlay districts. I know no one really likes that idea, but it does seem to have been used in other municipalities, and maybe that's something we need to consider. It's, you know, it's a dilemma for people. It's a real life dilemma. And I agree, while you don't have to sell to a developer, there are already numerous houses that have turned a certain way. And while the city doesn't have a right to decide what neighborhoods should be like, I think the community and community voices have a right to be heard on that. And that would be my comment.
Thank you. Commissioner Hallett.
I'm going to be very brief. I agree with all the comments that have been said, especially Commissioner Rogers, and so I would support alternative one.
Okay. Thank you. I think that kind of concludes the comments. I would note for the members of the public on the call, we're dealing with a reference that was an aldermanic reference, and staff, maybe you could kind of talk a little bit about yeah, the timing of when we need to make a decision, or if we need to make a decision, because I think there are, or whether the city council will take the, the next steps, because there are a lot of interrelated issues that need to be researched and addressed that will impact whatever the language is in whatever zoning amendment we make. So I think can maybe Megan or
Yeah.
I don't know who, or we've got a city attorney on the line as well, I see.
Yeah, so there are a number of different pieces to what is being proposed, or implications, so to speak. Since it seems like we do have some kind of direction on perhaps pursuing a particular alternative, we can look deeper into that. But we absolutely do acknowledge that there are other impacts that we do need to look at. And there are other items that are being worked on, such as the landlord tenant ordinance and things that the property maintenance ordinance. Angelica, if I've got that correct. So those are other aspects that kind of tie into this that are also being looked at. So we can continue to refine what we have, since this is discussion tonight, with the knowledge that there are other pieces of this that are currently being worked on in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
I don't have a set timeline, unfortunately. Perhaps Sarah or Angelique may be able to better provide a timeline for those other pieces, but just so you know, there are other portions of this that are being worked
on. I can provide a little bit of information on we are working on a evaluation of our landlord tenant ordinance, the nuisance premises ordinance, and those aspects of that aspect of our code. That is partly because there was a very recent, actually June 1 was when the new Cook County landlord tenant ordinance went into effect. That ordinance was based on Chicago, Evanston, and Mount Prospect's ordinance. So it's not like it's radically different, but there's some stuff that's in it that's very relevant. And we also, for us to look at, and we had actually had a discussion at the Housing and Homelessness Commission about that. And part of that discussion was also looking at nuisance premises ordinance, our nuisance premises ordinance, and looking at some of the examples that have been provided in the packet. In the past, I don't know if it's in this packet, we have a lot of stuff in there, probably is, like the Boston ordinance and the Hollywood, California ordinance that really are designed to address the types of behaviors more effectively than I think our current ordinance does. But the types of behaviors that are disruptive in the neighborhoods around Northwestern. We've also had a number of discussions with Northwestern, Dave Davis and Tony Kirchmeier, about ways to work better with students in off-campus housing. And all of those are going to continue. I don't have an absolute date that we're going to be bringing that forward, but I also think that reviewing and looking more deeply into the impact of how following alternate one is going to take some time, because it has to be done very carefully. And we have to look at the types of things that you've pointed out. We have to look at all the other parts of the code that would be affected, and things like group homes and all those sorts of things that, then there are a lot of other things on the agenda for council and everybody else. So I think that I'm not really in a position where I can say how quickly we can come back with all that, But I honestly think that everybody believes that we have to look at everything thoroughly and do a good job. We're not recommending that we come back next, plan commission meeting and just delete family and, that's it. That's never been our intention. So I find it very helpful to hear the comments of the commissioners. And I feel very strongly that, we have said all along, we don't believe the 3 unrelated is adequately addressing the nuisance issues around the campus. And there's information on ways we're looking at recommending addressing that more effectively. And to be effective, this is something that Commissioner Rogers pointed out in the last discussion. Without the capacity, the resources to actually enforce other mechanisms, we're not going to be any better off. So that is something that is going to have to be a consideration of the council.
Okay.
So.
All right, thank you. That's helpful. And I was just going to say that, it seems to me that one of the big issues as the city council grapples with this, the other ordinances, which are not the purview of the plan commission, budget obviously is going to be a consideration. So, unless there's some reason that, as long as there's not a reason for the plan commission to move forward more quickly, I would suggest that we kind of wait for those discussions to evolve and the city council to kind of provide some sort of direction or strategy that we then can take back. I think that, with the discussion and the position of where the commissioners stand on the issue, you have at least you have our current sense and concerns. And so I would suggest that probably it's best for us to as long as it's acceptable for us to kind of sit and wait for a while, that would be my suggestion as to what the plan commission ought to do at this point.
I mean, my personal preference would be that we take some sort of direction giving, because this is one of those issues that just keeps getting booted down the line, just further and further, and it comes up every once in a while and then gets booted again.
Well, I think that we have. I mean, that's kind of I think that in terms of where the sense of the commission, I think that there are a couple of us who want to, at least one of us, at least I want to stay with the current definition or retain a definition of family of some sort. And a number of the majority of the commissioners on the call today are interested in pursuing alternate 1. So I think that I don't know that we need to take a formal vote. And frankly, since this is for discussion, I don't know that a vote would be appropriate.
Well, I would ask the city attorney the question of whether we could make a recommendation that that staff be given specific direction through a motion. Because it's not an issue that is a decision as such, it is direction to staff. So I would ask the city attorney if that was within our ability to do that without violating rules.
Let me review the rules while you guys still discuss. I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
I think we're kind of done with the discussion, but we do have one other item. So perhaps we can go on to approval of the meeting dates through December of 2021.
So what I'll do right now is I will motion that we table this while the city attorney looks through direction, so that we can move on to another matter without closing this one out.
Oh. All right, I'll second that. We need to call the roll.
Yes, I will call the roll. Hold on 1 second. Commissioner Halleck?
Yes.
Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers?
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Yes.
Chair Linwall?
Yes.
That is tabled for now.
Okay, so the final item on our agenda is the Planning Commission meeting schedule for the balance of 2021.
So that calendar keeps the 2 meetings a month that we have established. And if there are no items, we can cancel as needed. It also speaks to having zoning committee meetings prior to the Planning Commission meetings at 6 p.m. as needed. There is one date on there, I think it's September 8th, that may be a conflict with a holiday. But I would need to double check with that one.
Okay. And only meeting once in December, November and December. That's kind of you.
Yeah, so Rosh Hashanah ends on the evening of September 8th. So
Okay.
just to be aware.
So we can move that if needed, or
not have.
not have that meeting.
Okay. And then do we know, oh yeah, we're still meeting virtually. Do we have any indication as to what the current thinking is on that? When we'll be back in person?
It looks like the governor will not be extending the order that actually permitted the use of remote meetings, or solely meeting remote. So I know the city just in general is looking at what meeting in person will look like. I think there will still be some capability to have people come or meet or tune in, so to speak, remotely, as I think there are probably some residents who have that comfort level, and we've probably been able to get a bit more participation due to being able to have things remote. So that is a part that we are still taking a look at. I think if we do end up meeting in person, there will still likely be some requirements for wearing masks and things like that, but the details have not been finalized as of yet.
Okay. So do we have a motion to approve the meeting schedule?
I'll move to approve. Sorry.
I'll second.
Take the roll.
Commissioner Halleck?
Yes.
Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers?
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Yes.
And Chair Linwall.
Yes.
Calendar is approved.
Okay, and then do we have to have a motion to untable? Or
I move that we remove from the table item 4A 20 PLND 0071 regarding occupancy of dwelling units.
A second?
Second.
Was Commissioner Hugo?
Yes, I believe so.
All right. Roll. Commissioner Halleck?
Yes.
Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers?
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg?
Yes.
And Chair Linwall.
Yes.
I believe that that you are allowed to direct staff to provide additional information. Was that your question?
Yeah, to point them in a direction instead of just kind of a let's continue to explore everything.
That is arguably under provide new information. So yeah.
Okay. In that case, I would make a motion that staff look further into alternative 1, and at such time that they are able, based on the other issues that are being addressed throughout the rest of the ordinances, come back to us with some verbiage that would be more appropriate for us to discuss in detail.
I'll second that.
All right. Commissioner Halleck?
Yes.
Commissioner Hugo?
Yes.
Commissioner Rogers,
Yes.
Commissioner Westerberg,
Yes.
Chair Linwall.
No.
And that passes 4-1.
Okay.
Chair Lindwall,
Yes.
if I could, I just did want to note that we did receive information that the hybrid and being back in person that Megan referred to is to start in July. So that will affect July meetings.
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure because I didn't hear us give you a date.
No, I kind of guessed that.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that everybody
All right.
got that.
All right, thank you. Anything else? All right, I guess I need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Well, second.
and we can do this with a voice vote,
I
can we
think
not?
this is okay with the voice vote.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, everyone.